And because of that, and because we live in a universe or a culture or society that has tried to make static good and the ultimate. You know, we find this in our buildings. If we can just be the same temperature all the time, you know, not too hot, not too cold. What happens, of course, is our bodies lose their ability to thermostat. But we try to control everything. Our relationships. So many of us believe if we can just get our relationships nailed down the way we want them, then we can get on with other things. Right? We don't think of ourselves or relationships or our houses as a process. We think of them as something to make static, to get static. Now, what happens to our bodies, to our spirits, to our beings when we are trying to static ourself in the universe? We know that much of our physical illness comes out of our attempt at control. Think of the stress that comes out of the attempt to control. I was impressed with Leo and Shirley when they were saying they lost a speaker today, you know. Well, that's the way it goes with conferences, you know. Now I could see a certain amount of panic as they mentioned that, and I'm sure there was a lot more earlier in the day. On the other hand, that's a process. Those things happen. That's the way the world is. We have not been trained to live in a process way. We didn't learn it in our schools. We didn't learn it in our homes. We didn't learn it in our institutions. So we don't know about our own process and living in a process way. And we continue to fall into the belief that if we can just get everything together and worked out, then it will be all right. And we do this with ourselves. We keep going to therapists and saying, someday I'm going to get my shit together. You know? What a crazy concept. What a crazy concept. And yet many of us live by that. Now, because we have not been process parented, and because our process has not been supported by the society, many of us have, I think this is what I call them, deep, unfinished, aborted, repressed, pushed down processes. Freud, I think, was afraid of these, and he called it the boiling cauldron of the unconscious. You might get a little feeling about his feeling about it. I think of it as our process, our deep process. And I think of our inner beings as very conservation-minded. They recycle our shit, and recycle our shit, and recycle it. If we don't get it the first time around, we'll get another chance. And another chance. And yet another chance. And each time it comes back, it usually comes back with a little more force, color, attention-getting devices, whatever, until we notice that we have a process that's coming up that needs to be dealt with. Now, so often we have tried to control these processes with drugs, techniques. Look at your techniques. I believe techniques are the downfall of psychotherapists. I think that one of the reasons that we keep trying to get new ones is because we know there's something wrong with what we're doing. If we just get the right fix, then we can fix. But they're terrible. Laying our techniques on people is totally disrespectful, I think. I think we really need to look at that. Well, what happens is when a deep process comes up, it's ready to be worked. I have never seen a deep process come up that wasn't ready to be worked. That the person hadn't developed the level of maturity, awareness, insight, strength, that they were really ready to deal with whatever's coming up. Now, many of us, with our completion model and our static model, think that when we get depressed, we failed. Or when we just wake up grunchy, we failed. Or when we start having memories and old stuff comes up that needs to be worked with, that we haven't really got it together and we failed. To me, it's just the opposite. It's an indicator of how strong you are, of how far you've come, that you're now ready to deal with whatever suppressed, repressed stuff is there that's ready to come up. And all you need is somebody to wait with you, be with you, facilitate you. No tricks, no gimmicks, no techniques, and let you go through your deep process and see where you come out. I say to the people who train with me, if you know, or if you think you know where a person needs to go in their deep process, or even if you think you know where they're going, you're in deep shit as a facilitator. You're obviously already in the way because you're thinking. It's not your problem. It's not your issue. You don't have to know what it's about. All you have to do is be there. That's all. Now, of course, this doesn't make us as indispensable as we would like to be as therapists. But I think deep process work is a very normal kind of thing. Now, deep process work can be stretching out, yelling, screaming, wailing, crying, rolling around. It can be any kind of thing like that. Deep process work can be taking a walk, and suddenly things just come together. Deep process work can be just having some alone time and letting yourself be aware of what's going on and let that come up. There are a whole range of deep processes. No two are alike. People deep process in many different ways. The training group that I just did in Germany, I did a training, an advanced training, 2 weeks in all. One of the women that was there trained with me for a year, and she's a retread, as we call it. She signed up for second year because she feels like she wants to get a real solid. And she brought her son with her for the training, Tobias. He's 6 weeks old. And some of the people in the group, especially one of the pediatricians, got her nose sort of out of joint with this, and well, I don't know that you should expose this child to all this yelling and screaming and carrying on and people deep processing, and you know what Tobias did with all that? Didn't bother him at all. And we talked about it, and she said, I think one of the things he's going to learn from being here is that your deep process work is normal. And it's part of life. And he'll feel better about his own stuff when it comes up. And he won't think he's crazy or there's something wrong with him. He'll know that it's part of life. Now what happens is as you go through your deep process, when they come up, because if you force them, it's the same thing as blocking them. Forcing and blocking are the same dualism. They're just different ends of the same dualism. As you go through your deep process work, and as you try to live in process, you reclaim yourself. Now, you can't do it in order to reclaim yourself. Doesn't work. As you do this, and as you learn to live your process, you begin to find that pieces of yourself that you didn't even know were there begin to emerge. What also happens is, as you learn to respect your process, you find yourself respecting the process of other people by default. You don't have to try to do that. As they say in AA, trying is dying. If you're trying to respect other people's process, you better take a look at your own. Now, what I'm finding with the people who are training with me, and I recommend that everybody who trains with me be involved in some 12-step group recovery program, and that during the year they find their most favorite addiction and find a group for it. And that we also train in living in process and deep process work. The most fascinating thing occurs that I've been encouraging the German and the Austrian and the American trainees to come to each other's groups in the United States or in Germany. There is no language problem. There is no international problem. People who are working on their recovery and trying to live in process immediately know each other. I think that one of the reasons is because they are present to themselves. And when you are there, which most of us aren't when we're in our addictive process, when you are there, it is possible to connect with others. One of the most important aspects of intimacy is learning how to be present to yourself. If you're not present to yourself, there is no way you can possibly show that person to another person. I believe that intimacy is one of the most threatening things to an addictive system. If people become intimate with themselves, therefore having the possibility of being intimate with others, an addictive system cannot survive. This work is not meant to be revolutionary. It is by default. Because by your very own personal act of recovery, you are challenging the status quo. You are challenging the system in which you live. You are one of the 100th monkeys. Isn't that a nice thought? Because, and I'm seeing this all over the world now, as individual people recover and learn to live in process, families are changing. Institutions are changing. We haven't yet seen whole societies, but I think that's coming. Now, I think that even using the term spirituality is probably part of an addictive system. This is my latest jag. Sometimes I wish I'd just shut up, like my son says. Oh, mother, quit. Can you remember one time? A whole crew of us, we used to have, well, we still do. I have the kind of Thanksgiving at my house where I've quit inviting people. But one year I decided, all these people, it's just so many, and I'm only going to invite maybe 10 or 15 people. And so I did. And we still had 35. So I just, it's okay, Thanksgiving, that's what we do now. And we all went to midnight communion. We decided we would all truck down to the midnight service at the Methodist Church. And during the service, I got absolutely furious with communion on Christmas Eve. I'm still not quite sure what it was all about, but it had something to do with blood and guts on Christmas Eve. It just seemed wrong to me at the time. And I was in the middle of our whole row. Our extended family took the whole row. And I decided I couldn't in good conscience take communion. And I thought, ugh. So when it got time to go, I said, I'm not going. And my son said, Mother, do you have to? Absolutely everything. Take it so seriously. Can't you just go up and swallow that stuff and not worry about it? I mean, I said, no, I can't do it. And he said, of course, everybody's going to have to stumble over you going out and over you coming in. I said, that's right. That's right. And he said, oof. He was like junior high. For a mother that just would accept things. I said, well, that's not who you got this round, honey. You got me. You have to deal with it. But I think that that's what happens, is as we begin to recover, we begin to see these little things that we can't do anymore. All of a sudden we just can't do them anymore. And when we put our sobriety first, it's so simple. It's not easy, but it's very simple. Now back to spirituality. This past year, I did a year-long spirituality group. It was really great. We started out calling it the year of advanced spirituality training. And it was for people who'd already trained with me for a year, and we were going to do this year. Well, then I started thinking about it, and I thought, what in the world is spirituality training? Every spirituality training I've heard about, I wouldn't give two hoots and a holler for, and so I said to the group at the first meeting, I'm not real comfortable with what we're calling this. I don't think we can call it spirituality, an advanced spirituality training. I mean, what in the world does that mean, And so we bumbled with this all year, and then we started calling it the spirituality year, when I was comfortable with this about half of the year, And then I said, I'm uncomfortable with this term spirituality. I think I am being spiritual when I am taking a shit. I am being spiritual when I am paying my bills. I am being spiritual when I am in a twit. And what is this separating? And I know one of the things that brought it on is a woman who had gone through the training year. Very shy woman, a wonderful woman, very shy. She's quiet a lot. And people had been saying to me, she's so spiritual. I said, that makes me want to throw up. What are you, spiritual? She's shy, for heaven's sakes, And so she sits there terrified to say anything, and people say, isn't that spiritual? And then I had another friend who died of cancer last year, and everybody who's dying becomes spiritual. You know how that is? I mean, you have a person who's dying, and they're dealing with their dying, which of course all of us have to do. And people say, oh, this person is ascending. And I said, look at her. I mean, she's still just the same old person that she was. She's struggling with her dying, but I don't see any wings sprouting or any halo shining. And we're looking for a spiritual person, Well, you know where it is? Right there in that chair. You can't be not spiritual. No matter how hard you try. You can try to shut it off with your addictions, but you can't do it because that's who you are. It's not a part of you. It's not something you can filter out scientifically or shut off or cut off or measure and say, this is my spiritual part and this is my non-spiritual part. Because you are. What addictions have done is disconnect you from that awareness. What an addictive society has done is disconnect you from the wholeness of everything you are, which by definition is spiritual. The church, I think, has tried to convince us that it is responsible for our spirituality in order to make itself indispensable. But you were spiritual before the church. That doesn't mean that some of you don't find that supported by the church. But you already were. The church did not invent your spirituality. Now, one more thing I'll just say. Out here in California, I always feel called upon to say this. And that has to do with pooky New Age stuff. I think that we're doing the same thing with a lot of the New Age stuff that we've done with therapy and all these other fixes. We are, if we just hang ourselves with enough crystals, if we just sit in a certain position, if we just make certain noises, whatever, we think that we can control our spirituality, our being. And what we're doing is we're looking for a new fix. Now, I believe that it is not possible to transform without recovery. And I think this is the limitation of some of these spiritual fixes, is that you're trying to get a fix without facing your addictions. While I stand before you saying it's not going to work. On the other hand, you can't recover without transformation. That if you are going to recover, you're going to have to be open to transform. So many of us would like to fix this little piece and leave the rest untouched. Good luck. It's not going to work. But if you're continuing to look for fixes and techniques and gimmicks, that's not going to work either. That I believe, unless you're willing to face your addictiveness and the subtleties of the ways that you are buying into this addictive system, it is not possible for you to have the experience of spiritual transformation. And as you face your addictions, your spiritual self, which is already there, begins to reemerge. And you begin to see it. The processes go hand in hand. They can't be separated. We have tried to do one without the other, I think. So many of our gimmicks are trying to get us a fix without reclaiming our whole selves. It's not possible. Now, we have talked about how difficult recovery is. Reclaiming our whole selves. It's not possible. Now, we have talked about how difficult recovery is. Well, I think that's crock shit. How great was your life before you started recovering, huh? Isn't that silly? That's part of our addictive thinking. It's not so hard. We talk about the disease as being powerful, baffling, cunning, and patient. Well, have you ever realized that your own living process is cunning, baffling, powerful, and patient? Have you ever realized that even though everything around you has militated against your own living process, you've had no parental help with this, you've had no help from your society, and yet each of you still is a living process. And that process is available to every one of you. Even though you have pushed it away, ignored it, pushed it down, tried to get rid of it, your living process has never left you. It's always been there. And it has tried every conceivable way to get your attention. It is, I think, more cunning, baffling, powerful, and patient than the disease. And it's with you. I think of it very much like, in the New Testament, the verse of, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." I think of that's how my process is. Sometimes I don't even see the door or hear the knock, but it's there. And the knocking goes on. And as I begin to face my addictions, I see more and more doors and I hear more and more knocks. And I have the possibility of walking through them. Each of you continues to have your process, even though you have tried to get rid of it. To me, that's the most amazing thing. Another thing about recovery that's so amazing to me is so many people who grew up in really addictive families have no idea what sobriety is. No idea. And yet, thousands, millions of them are starting the road to recovery. To move into something they have no experiential memory what it is. Now that's a miracle. And it's happening all the time. What is happening, I think, is we are changing our consciousness about what this disease is, about how it relates on every level to the society, about what the underlying addictive process is. And that, I think, is the change in consciousness that I see all over the world. Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm tired. God knows what time I'm on. I think it's 10:06 in Germany. I'm just getting up. Do you want to ask any questions? Say anything. I've gone on. I decided not to take a break. He asked me before if I was going to. Yes.
I want to make a comment.
It's wonderful that you're doing. And there is no problem, is there? It's amazing. I think our enemies have a lot to do with our disease. Yes.
I wanted to thank you for everything you said. I completely agree. The one thing that troubled me was your comment about Al-Anon, continuing the disease process. It took me a long time in Al-Anon to hear the phrase, keep the focus on yourself. And I think that if you use all of that, we're not external reference.
I agree with you completely. And I think that we need to move into more honesty on why people go to Al-Anon. And I think that's what I was trying to say. Absolutely, if you work in an Al-Anon program, there's no way that you're going to continue with your external referencing. But the fact that you go because you are associated with is the disease, and I think we need to break through that at the very beginning. and to help Al-Anon people learn to say, I am a relationship addict. I am a sex addict. Because I think one of the things I know is that the more honest we get, the more our sobriety increases. That we have to be painfully honest. But yes, I agree. Thank you for, yes.
Could you define the term protecting our supply? What is our supply used in this country?
It can be anything. Your supply can be your control illusion. Your supply can be, of course, your liquor. I'll give you an example, a very subtle one of a woman I love very much. The first intensive she came to, she almost wrecked it completely. We finally call her Karen the Baptist. She was a real good Baptist, and there were some gay women there, and she really, genuinely was afraid that she not only was threatening her own salvation, but that of her children by being 9 days in a room with lesbians. And of course, certain people in the group took umbrance to her attitude, and I thought we were going to have a battle right there. But she's now been through the training. Took a couple of years. And she has done a lot of work on her own recovery. And she was on heavy duty antidepressants because she was so mega suicidal. And she was on a beta blocker and had, of which the side effects are irreversible spasticity. And she had had several attacks on this and finally decided to go off it. But what she realized was that after some period down the line, she was a codependent. She started going to Al-Anon, adult children. She's made some wonderful statements. She got real angry with her husband. They had a perfect marriage. She was just in the hospital every once in a while for suicidal attempts. But other than that, perfect marriage. Pillars of the community. And when she started getting better, her husband wanted a divorce. And she just went into a fury and made one of the best statements I have ever heard. She said, he made vows, he promised to love me in sickness and in health. And he loves me when I'm sick, and when I'm getting healthy, he wants a divorce. And it was a great line. But then after some time, she discovered that her husband is a sex addict. And she then discovered that she was a relationship addict. And that she was willing to be involved in his sex addiction to protect her relationship supply. And had been physically and sexually abused. That's protecting your supply. And we all do it all the time. When you're tempted to lie about something, you're probably protecting your supply. It's good to see what it is when you're tempted to lie. When you get real defensive about something, you're probably protecting your supply. It's a good clue to stop and say, what is it I'm not willing to let go of? And I believe if it's something you're not willing to let go of, it's probably an addiction. Okay, does that make it clear? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the line between being with someone in their process and doing intervention? Because they seem somewhat antithetical.
Mm-hmm. An intervention is giving a person information about how their disease affects you. And stating as clearly as you can what your limits are and what the consequences of going over those limits. I think very few of us know the difference between giving information and letting it go and trying to control the outcome. Mm-hmm. Yes?
I was interested in your comments about therapy and the 12-step program and tools and everything. I'm a therapist, and I'm also a recovering alcoholic and addict. And my particular training is in psychiatry, so I get a lot of, I've got to be real objective and everything. Mm-hmm. And also, though, from the AA standpoint, I'm told that by the traditions and things like this, I should not break anonymity, and when I'm being paid for, when I'm in that kind of situation. And I find myself at times wanting to share, wanting to, because I'm in the middle of that process myself,
mm-hmm.
And anyhow, that's my confusion you can hear, and trying to kind of work with that out of the boundaries.
I really understand what you're saying. And a couple of years ago, I was investigated by APA on an ethics charge. And I was exonerated. It only cost me $10,000 to get exonerated from false charge. But in the process, I studied the ethics of APA and decided that I couldn't agree with them. And mainly the reason I couldn't agree with them was because everything was based on the myth of objectivity. And it became real clear to me why we have so much sexual acting out between therapist and client. Because given that worldview and that way of looking at things, this is one of the most intimate relationships that we have, between a therapist and client. You really get to know each other. And because it is based on the myth of objectivity, the therapist believes what they have to do is shut off their awareness, et cetera, and not deal with it, and not be there, and their own issues. And so what happens is it breaks out, and usually in sexual ways, because in the society and the addictive system, we tend to sexualize intimacy. So it became clear to me that not only were the ethics unethical, but they were probably perpetuating some of the very things that they're developed to try to control. And that the whole basis of the ethics was a control mechanism. And so I dropped my membership in APA. I felt I could no longer be a member in good conscience. That wasn't sober for me. And I have tried to develop my own model of working with people. And it works. It really works. And I am right there. If I have a deep process, I do my work. I always share what's going on with me, my own recovery, issues that I'm dealing with. I had a terrific insight in Germany about the subtlety of interpretation with one of the trainees who I had an interaction, and I realized, it's like the first part of the interaction was fine, and then let me give you this example because we can all learn from my mistakes. She's an American trainee, and she was coming to the groups in Germany, and she suddenly realized that Germany is not that far from Israel. I mean, when you're in Europe, everything is not that far. And, compared to Ohio, Germany was closer. And so she suddenly realized that she could go down to Israel and see her grandchildren and have a holiday with them. And so she got all excited about that. And then she thought, well, maybe her daughter-in-law wouldn't want her to come, and she kind of went through this stuff. And so she called, and they said, oh, yes, come. So she said, I'm going. Well, then one of the other trainees said to her, which I think was the interpretation, I think you may be running away from something, So she comes to me and she said, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't know, And I said, I was uncomfortable when you just like that said you were going to, instead of going to the training, advanced training, say that you were going to run down to Israel. And I said, something didn't feel right to me. And then I said, and it was funny because as I said it, the words got like big balls of cotton. I love it when you start to become aware of things. And I said, maybe, my hit was that maybe you were so thrilled that your daughter-in-law wanted you to come that you didn't take time to see what you really wanted. And she said, oh, that was really helpful, thanks, I started to walk away, and I just felt, oh, shit. And I went back and I said, I want to make an amend. I did it, I said, I don't know. I said, all I can tell you is I felt some uneasiness, and the decision seemed real snap to me. And I just felt some uneasiness, and I would like for you to take a look at it. And I just made an interpretation. I make an amend. And boy, it's subtle, it's real subtle. And I feel like with myself, like one of the physicians that's in the training with me, and he's an ophthalmologist. It's real interesting in people who are training with me. But he says, some of this stuff is like it's burned on our skin. And when we pull it off, our skin comes. And I said, I know. I know. And it's like this. I've done so many things that you're not supposed to do as a therapist, and almost all of them have worked. So, I'm writing it up, I'm just going to share my journey with it, because I think a lot of this stuff that we've been taught is terrible. It's like in some cities now, they want to get into recovery, but their ethics say that they cannot associate with clients or potential. And so what they're doing is they're starting their own stratified 12-step groups so they won't get kicked out of their professional organizations. Well, that is crazy. I mean, that is, it works against what recovery is about. One interesting thing in Germany is that there's not that kind of rigidity that we have over here. The workshops that I do, the therapists come with their clients, their babies, and they all are in one big, in fact, this one psychiatrist who's training with me has the new baby. One of her clients felt very strongly that she didn't want her to quit her practice and offered to babysit 2 or 3 days a week. Because she's since moved to another town. While she sees her clients, she said, I think this work you're doing with addictions and process is so important and I want to continue seeing. And when she goes for her appointment, her husband, who's also a client, babysits the baby when she goes to a women's group. Well, of course, in the United States, oh God, you could get in real deep shit for that, But it works just fine. It works just fine. So I think we've been real crazy around some of this stuff, and I think it's because of the worldview that it comes out of, and it supports the disease. So, what Martin Luther always used to say, it's a loose translation, but it's, it's kind of the feeling. He always said, sin bravely so that grace may abound. Yes.
Big shift. It seems to me that would be a profound shift that would be very much resisted, because the therapist, as such, thought of by the patient and other people and themselves as sort of a deity on high, Whereas when you suggest they may do the 12 steps and be just one of the
recovering sickos, yes.
That's a terrible drop.
Yeah. That's right. But you know, their deity is killing them. I mean, talk about burnout. Burnout is nothing but codependence. Practice, institutionalized codependence. So it's killing us. I talked about this really for the first time. I was a speaker at the California Marriage and Family Therapist last spring. Yeah. And I decided, well, here's a good group. You know, they're all therapists. Let's just put it out and see what they do. And I thought they might kill me, you know, because I was saying things like your techniques. Why do you like your techniques so much? I'll tell you why I like them so much. It's because you don't have to be present. You know, you can manipulate people. Something comes up. What you elicit is useful, but it's like using forceps in a normal delivery. You know, it can hurt the baby, the mother, etc., but you're in control. And but you don't need them. You don't need them. You know, the other thing that they do is they allow you not to be present. Because you can do techniques and be completely gone. Everybody in the room knows that. You don't have to be present. And you know, they loved it. There were about 10% that hated me. And of course, those are the ones I read over and over and over, like good codependent. But the majority of them said, right. And I think this is why the techniques have been so popular with therapists, that down deep we have known that what we were doing wasn't working. And so we go to every new teacher to learn every new method, and then we go back and we lay it on our clients. But down deep, what we've needed to do is make a shift in the way we look at the whole thing. So I think we're ready. It's time to move on. I mean, don't you get really bored when somebody lays a bunch of 60s techniques on you? I mean, they were great in the 60s. They were innovative. But they're out of date. But people still pay to do them and have them done to them. That's amazing to me. Yes.
Impressed with the Germans bearing gifts and the fun therein, but you and Luther sitting on commodes having spiritual experiences too good to pass up.
That's right. Brother Martin was very earthy, wasn't he?
Well, you both had comments about the Pope. I wanted to hear about it.
Oh, mine. Well, yeah. I think the Pope is a sex addict. I have never heard the Pope make a speech that wasn't focused on sex. And sex is the most important thing that, you know, happens and you know, one of the things in writing this book that I did, the one that's coming out in January, that I really was fascinating to me, was it's real easy for me to say how the society supports this addiction or that addiction. I really got into it in romance and sex and relationship addiction. But the thing that I did in this book, which I really enjoyed, was I started saying, what are the implications of recovery? You know, what if, for example, everybody in this room would recover from sexual addiction? What would they do in advertising? Huh? But most importantly, what would the churches do? If people recovered from sex addiction, the churches might be forced to deal with spirituality. Because right now what they're dealing with a lot of the time is sex. In one form or another. Repression, etc. The whole attitude of institutionalized religion has made sex the most important aspect of a relationship. Well, that's totally distorted. So it's been fun to think about some of these things. But you're right, Brother Martin made some wonderful comments about his bodily functions. I really like him. I have a friend in Paris who is a priest. I think he's a Jesuit. He's the world's foremost authority on Luther. I found it so interesting. He said Luther was a better Catholic than the Pope. It's fascinating, some of these people. Yes?
Would you repeat the title of your book that's coming out?
It's called Escape from Intimacy. I like that title, too. I hate titles. I have a terrible time with titles, but I sort of like it. Sort of a takeoff on Eric Fromm. Yes?
Could you elaborate a little bit for me how this would work if we had a therapist who had done her 12-step program, who would be there for a client who would not hide behind or be part of the system? How would that work in your sort of vision, that we have, like, say, an intuitive connectedness?
We have some people here who are working with therapists like that in the area. Do you all want to say anything? Nick, Carolyn? The question was, what would it be like if you're working with a therapist who's working a 12-step program, and I would say facilitating a process? What would it be like? Are you either one of you two willing to say what your experience is?
It's a very different experience. It's a very different experience. At first, when Jane started sharing her process with me, I was just really taken back. And one time I remember she asked me what kind of a relationship I had with her. I envisioned that I had with her, and I thought, well, I just said, well, you're my therapist. And she said, well, if that's all it is, I'm really concerned about that, and we need to stay in touch with that. And it was just such a new concept, and it had made such a difference to me in just how I presence myself in my own recovery by having somebody to relate to who's in her recovery and sharing her process with me. And it's been a hard adjustment.
I just like to add that I find myself, he's the same person that you see, and I find myself slipping into the old way of being. I see her as the therapist, but she's constantly reminding me.
You were well clarified, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought you were.
And she's constantly reminding me that that's not okay with her, and that doesn't feel good to her. And my experience of working with her is very gentle and very respectful. Very respectful.
I can comment on that process. I work with a therapist, but it isn't in the office as a therapist. That is her profession, but we're girlfriends, and we're both in recovery. And the subtleties of recovery are the most exciting things that are happening right now for me, because we can do very ordinary things in our daytime. Both of mine stop by the bookstore, get something, have an opinion, and we can catch each other. And she works very subtly with me. You know, she has a lot of background, a lot of experience, a lot of exposure, a lot of sobriety. And she, you know, it's like I don't even know it's happening to me. And all of a sudden I realize that I've made a
a lot of insight. I can work the 4th and 10th step very fast now. I don't have a 72-hour lag period to have my emotions catch up with the reality. I can work it real. It's getting faster all the time. And my dignity, I feel really good. I feel close to her. I feel like she's really kind to me. And I help her, and she points that out to me. She likes hanging around. So I feel good about the whole process.
I think another thing that comes up often in our intensives is that people say it's the most brutally honest situation they've ever been in, with no judgment. Absolutely no judgment. And the safest, most healing environment they've ever been in. Yes?
I find it's real exciting moving in all this direction and everything. One of the things that really concerns me, though, is I think it's so easy when you're the therapist that even as much as you try not to, other people do give you a lot of power up there. And it's real hard to keep your own ego out of it. And and you can make comments or share things, and I get concerned that the other person is great. It's just real hard not to kind of get in the position of sort of telling the other person how they ought to do their program. And so I think it's a thin line you're walking there.
Well, yeah, I've not known a lot of people who worked other people's programs, that either one of them got much better. So I think that's part of the problem. And, I think that part of the help is a community that will call you and stuff. That's real important. And for me, I work my own process. I work it really hard. And I trust myself with that. Years ago, when I started getting better known, I had a couple of people that I knew who were much better known than I was. And I watched them get what I thought was a progressive fatal disease. Codependence or whatever it was. Then they were in my relationship with it. But other than that, it's not my problem. And some of them, dump their stuff on me. And that's not my problem either. I think we better quit. I'm really tired, and I'm sure you're tired of sitting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. I think we got more than we bargained for. This whole dilemma of ethics, and very interesting, and it's especially interesting to me because I'm thinking of having conferences like this in corporation settings, and the ethics theme keeps coming up over and over again, and it's one thing I'm going to be starting to explore, so I'm really excited it came up in such a big way this evening. I didn't even expect that to happen. I would like to make a few announcements now, and you've been sitting a long time, you probably didn't have a break or anything, and you're ready to move, but I know if I don't capture you now, we'll get you again. There will be new people coming in tomorrow, so I really encourage you to sign up for the workshops at the back. It's kind of first come, first served, and we're going to be in different rooms. This is the main room where we're going to have all the keynote speakers in this room, so this is like our home room. We keep coming back here.